Now that we have our histogram chart ready, the next step is to take that data that we're already sharing using Recoil. We have the data management using our data, and then we can start using that data and integrate other libraries to help us. I'm using MaterialUI, but you can use any other library you like. There's plenty of those. And what I'm going to be doing is I'll create a table that has the day and price, so you can check the exact date. And we'll use some grid elements, and we'll complete the chart by putting a slider for the number of ticks. And this is really a simple design. It's not fancy, but I just want you to see how you can integrate the same data and how it all comes together when we create a widget. And inside the widget we have a chart and we have other elements, so it's really completing the entire widget, so you can see how you can reuse data with other elements and how to integrate D3 with React and other libraries. To create the price table list component, I'll take help from Generate React CLI. I created a template component for MaterialUI. So if you open up the README inside of the component folder, you could see that there's already a command for a template that says type MaterialUI. And let's call this component price table list, and that's gonna generate for us a component that already include the SAS. It's included the component itself, and it's included the testing suite. You can see it here: histogram chart and price table list. So we have the SAS file, the test file, and we have the price table list. So if you open up the price table list, you could see that there's some code already built in. We have the use style already included with the background color, and we have our function component with an interface for the prop comment out, and we have a state, and we're rendering a button. So we have, a basic starting point that we can start building a component. In terms of the rendering, what we need is a few things. We need to put a table container, and then we need to put a table with rows. So I can actually get rid of the button. We don't need any of the buttons. And because table container can be used like a div or an empty tag, I don't even need those empty tags. So we can just use table container. And because the Create React app with the template that I created for you already including MaterialUI, you don't need to add MaterialUI. It's already built in. And what we can do is we can attach for the class name the classes that style that we're creating already. So you can see here it's already built in, the classes. So we can call the classes root to use for the background, and then for the component we can pass in paper for MaterialUI for a component style. Then for the table itself, we'll create another tag called table, and then we need to set the Arial label. I think it's required, the area label. That's for accessibility. So we'll set it just, let's call it simple table. So we have a table, and we should also give it a style. So we can give it a style. Let's call classes dot table. And then what we can do, we can go back into our styles. So we have the style for the button, but we deleted that code. So we need to create style for the root. And what we can do is just put maximum, we can put maximum height. So our component doesn't exceed a certain height. And for our table, we can give it a minimum width. So it doesn't go below a certain width, let's say 650. You can change those. I'm just giving you an example. For the state, we don't need the state. And we're not opening anything, like we have the code with the button, so we can delete that. And inside of our table, we need to put a table head tag. And inside the table head, we can put the table rows and the table body after that. So we can already set it up so we don't forget. Table body. So when we create a table with MaterialUI, it's similar how you do it with HTML. You put the table cell of the head, and then we put the table cell for the rows. Okay, so for the head, we need to create our table rows, and we're really going to have two rows. We're going to have one for the day, and we're going to have one for the price. So inside of the table row, to do that, you create a cell, and you give the cell a name. So the first one will be a day, and the second one will be the price. And let's see, we can give it a style and pass the color if we want. So that would be a good way to kind of set the color of our table cell. So we can just create a style, and for the color, pass it from the, we'll set it at the props. So we can, you see, inside of our interface, we can, we're gonna need the data, so we can already put that in here in our interface. So we need the types. We can use the same types from either from our histogram widget, or we can take it from the model. We have it in two places. So we can take the data, and it's an array, and we can set the text color. This is just an example for you how you can really, we're just going to pass the color string in that we're going to use for our table cells. Okay, and we have it for the table cell. We'll set the same style for the price. Now for the table body, let's see what's complaining. We need to import all those libraries. So we can import the table head, we can import the rows, the table rows. Let's see what else. Okay, table rows. Actually, you don't have any errors. You need to import the table from MaterialUI. And we need to fix the order. We're missing the table cell. Table cell. So sometimes it doesn't do a great job importing everything, but you could see by the format here of the rows, so you could probably guess what the cell is going to be. It's probably going to be the same as the row. Okay. Table cell, great. And we need the table body. Okay. Now inside of our table body, what we can do, we're already expecting the data, so we can just use we can map and iterate through our results. So we'll call the props data, and then we can map through the results, and we know that the data is going to be of type data, types data, and it's going to be the next. Let's expect the index. I don't know if we're going to use it, we'll see, but we can just set it already. Here we go. And then inside of our, when we map, we can paste in our table row. Let's see. No, this needs to be a bracket. And then we need to close our brackets, first bracket, the second bracket, and close this one. Okay, great. Let's see what's complaining. Okay, it's expecting some kind of expression, that's why. Okay, the next thing we need to do is now we can just put in our table rows. So table row, and then for the table row, it needs also a table cell, and inside the table cell it needs the value. So the value I'm going to be using is the index plus 1, because the index starts from 0, so it's always we want to do it always plus 1. And you can see here when I'm hovering over the table row, it's complaining because it doesn't have a key. So React really expect, when we're doing a mapping, it's expecting a key, because if we don't set a key, then React can not know which element you're referring to, and then it can really break how it handles the DOM. So the key needs to be unique. What I can do, there's a little library that I like to use, that's called React UUID. So I can just edit, do yarn add React UUID. You can, create a random key yourself. Just don't key off the index or anything that can repeat itself. So because the index will get changed, so that's not a good way to go about it. I usually use this library UUID. The only problem with this library is that it doesn't have a TypeScript. So because it doesn't have a TypeScript, what we can do is we can we can set it as a constant and just use require, and that way ESLint is not going to complain about what I'm doing here. So I'm just creating UUID, and then I'll be able to use it. I also need to fix the import here. So the order of the table MaterialUI needs to be before the types. Then if you notice on the prop, I got an error because I need to uncomment that, because we're going to be using properties, and we're missing paper. So let's import that from Material Core. I'm importing the paper component, and let's see what's happening now. It's complaining about the prop. Let's see why. This should really disappear. Sometimes it takes a few seconds to get re-indexed. Okay, while it's doing that, inside of my key, what we can do is we can set a template style and just call it, you can call it price dash, and then we can put our UUID, and that will generate a unique ID for our component. Next, we need to create a table cell for price. So for price, we can use the data. So what we can do is we can use a template, and it needs to be, we want the price as fixed too. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to do parse float, and then we're gonna pass the d price, and we'll cast it as a string, and then we can use to fix 2. This way we get only 2 fraction digits. Otherwise, we don't want, we want a nice little format there. The other thing we need to do is for the SAS, let's for a table, we want to format our table cell so we can add some formatting. What we want to do is we want to create a background for the table cell head and for the table cell itself. So we can call it that way. We can call it price table list table cell head and give it a background color. I'll use some hex of 343434. It's going to give us a nice gray. And the same for the price table list table cell, and we'll give it a background color so we can see the difference between the head of the table and the element. So we can use another gray color 515151. Then we can assign those to our component. So let's see, it doesn't like this. We need to probably add a known. Yeah, we have to add a known to the price, and we need to set our table list cell and the header. So let's start with the header. So go back into the price table list text file, TypeScript file, and then we can add to our header. If you go back to the header, here's our header, and then we can put under every table cell a class name of that price table list table head, and do the same to the second cell. And we want to do the same for the table cell. So for the table cell, let's copy the name so I don't have typos. Okay. And do it for the other cell. And we need to set more properties to our table cell. We can collapse this so it's easier to read. Okay, so we got the class name, then we can set the style with the props we're passing from our parents component, which was text color. Great. And for the component, we can set it as type th, and the scope of is going to be a row. Okay, and we can do the same for our second row. So it's we want it to match. So we can just copy all those values for a second. Here we go. Let's break it. Okay. Let's see if we didn't forget anything. Not getting any errors, it's looking good. Okay, so now that we have our, we have one more thing. We're not passing any theme, so we don't need to create the styles. What we can do, we can just collapse all of that. We can just do make style, and we can collapse all this tag because we're not using that. And format it better. Okay, we can use theme, but we're not using theme. We're just setting up a style, so that will do it. Let me see, classes is, okay, so it all looks good, I'm not getting any error. The next step is go back to the histogram chart widget, and what we want to do is we want to work on the rendering. So it's adding our table list that we just created. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a grid container. So I'm going to use MaterialUI grid container. So the type will be container. And I'll set the spacing so it's spaced out in the middle of 5. And our close grid will be at the end. Here you go. Have to format it. Okay. And inside of our grid, let's see if it's still complaining. Make sure it imported it. Yeah, it imported the grid. Then the next thing we need to do is we need to put 2 grids, one that's going to hold our histogram and one that's going to hold our table. So to do that, just create another grid of type item, and the size would be extra small with 6. You could look at MaterialUI. They have example how to exactly create those grids. So that's an easy way to kind of work with it. And inside of our grid item, we'll put the histogram. Let's take care of some of those errors. We need to import the grid, and the import needs to happen before, so we need to fix that. Okay, let's see, there's still errors. Let's see what else the problem. It doesn't like, because this shouldn't be in the bracket. If we're importing it, if we put the entire import statement, then we don't need to put the brackets. Okay, looking good. So okay, so now we have one grid for our histogram, and then we need to create another grid for our price table. So create another grid. It's also going to be of type item with extra small size of 6. And inside of it, we can put a div so we can format things around. And inside we can put our price table list, and it expects the data. So in terms of the data, we're just going to use the same data that we're sharing with our histogram. So we generated that using Recoil, so you can just pass it data. For the text color, we can just use a white color, so we can, for color spaces, we can just use keywords of white. That will do it. And then for the div, we need to style it. So what we can do is we can, I want to give it a width that will match our width dimension of our bounded width. So our chart right now is set as default from our template as width and height of 0.9. But that's really too much, because we're sharing this component between the histogram table list and the chart. So we can change the width and height to 50% to occupy 50% of the screen. And then the other properties, we can move it from the top. So we got right 50, left. We can move it a little bit from the left 50. So 50 from the left, just so it aligns better. And then right 50, top 10, and bottom 50. Now we can use the same dimension that we use for our histogram. We can actually use it for our style. So let's collapse this so you can see it better. Okay. So here for our price list, we can close the tag, and for a div we can set the style equal. Now because we're doing it inline, we need two brackets, and we can set the width to our dimension, current, and the bounded width. So the width will match that 50% we set, because we don't need to occupy too much of the screen. It needs to be shared between them. Let's see, it's giving me an error. Let's see why. It's probably the formatting. Open the grid, close the grid. Sometimes it's changing things automatically and creating errors. Let's take a look. Oops, you see the error disappeared. It just sometimes takes some time to index things around. It is complaining that I don't have a space here, so let's put the space. That should do it. And we need to collapse so it's on the same line as the div. Okay. Now let's see, let's run it, see that everything works. If we look at our local host, looks like it's working, but our table rows and titles look like white. That's the default colors. So let's see what's going on there. Go to price table list. First of all, look like we're not using the theme and the create style, so let's remove that. Yeah, the problem is that we're not importing the CSS file. So we need to import the CSS file. So just use import CSS file, then go back into our local host, refresh. Great, look, it looks like it worked, but there's another problem here. It's look like every table head, it's starting a new row, and we need it to be on the same row. So let's take a look. Yeah, you see, we're opening the table row and I'm closing it, so we need to get rid of that. We don't want to open a new row, we want them to be on the same row. Great. So now you can see we're sharing the same data. We don't even need to load it twice. We're sharing the same data. We have all the different days and the prices, and the same data is being parsed over to our chart. Now we need a couple more things. We need to set the title. We need to set our label here, the days and the price, and we need to put a slider so we can adjust our settings. Go back to the histogram chart widget. And the only thing we have left to do here is change the title. Let's give it a name. I'm using last year, 2020, Ethereum price, days price, histogram chart. And we're done with our chart. And for the histogram chart component, we need to do a few more things here. The first thing we need to do is we need to add those two text labels for the days and price. So what we can do it, we can put it as part of our peripheral. So after the y-axis and the x-axis and the y-axis, we can add two text fields, SVG, and we'll give it a location of a minus value. So it's going to put it before, and we can set the y location. We can use the dimensions and set it up at the top area. It's going to be about 7 pixels less. Here we can put 24. Okay, so that will position it for us at the top left area. I'll give it a font size of 10, so it's small, and we'll call it days. Then we need to do the same for the price. So So we'll create a price SVG text, the font size the same, and this time we need the dimension for the Y needs to be the height of the bounded, because we want it at the x-axis at the bottom. So just set it as bound height, and I'm going to add a little bit offset of 17, and for the x value we can use the width, so we can set it to the bound width because we want it, you know, at the bottom all the way at the end. And I'm gonna add an offset so it's not at the end, it's a little bit before. Let's see what's happening. It's still complaining. It wants it in a new line. Okay. Here too, if we collapse it, it needs to be formatted correctly. So I'm not formatting it the way ESLint wants. And what else it's complaining? Let's take a look. Okay, this needs to collapse to the next line. Okay. So now that we have our text, the two text, the next component we need to add that slider element. So what we can do, the slider element cannot go inside of our SVG because we're going to use MaterialUI. So what we can do is we can create a new div element, and there we can put that. I did set for us a couple of CSS, one for the slider and one for the text. So all the text, I'm setting it to white so we can see it on the screen against the dark colors. And for the slider div, I'm setting a width of 400 and some paddings. This way we're kind of limiting the size of our slider. So let's just set the name to the name I gave it, slider div. Okay, and then our we have you know, if you recall, if we look at it, we want to put a little text there that will tell you that the slider is for the number of ticks. So we can use, inside of a div, we can use typography. It's part of MaterialUI, and we can set an ID. We need some kind of ID. Actually, we don't need ID, forget it for now. The only thing I want to do is I want to gather it to the bottom. And we can put a label inside, let's call it number of ticks. And then we can use the slider component from MaterialUI. And in the slider component, we need to do a few things. We need to set what is going to be our default value. And our default value, if you go back, you'll see that we set a state, right? If you remember, we set a state of number of ticks. So we can set the default values just binding to the number of ticks. And for the area value text, what we can do is we can use the value, which would be the number that the user select, and then we can do an inline function to return the value of ticks. Okay, and for the value label display, we can set it to auto, and we need to give it a minimum and a maximum value. So we can start from 10 ticks up to 50, and then we can close the slider. I'm sure it doesn't like my formatting. Okay, and the div formatting. If I want to be, I showed this to you before, but if we want to just fix quickly all the formatting, just run the yarn format, and that will run the run script and run the prettier and clean all that stuff up for us automatically, so we don't have to touch it according to whatever prettier rules we set. Then the last thing we need to do is we need to add an onChange event. You can see it just fixed everything for us according to the prettier rules we set. So if you look here in the prettier file, prettier RC, we set the rules, so it's going to follow the rules we set. It's still complaining. Let's see why. The closing must be aligned. Okay, now it stopped complaining. Okay, great. And then the only thing we need to do is we need to handle a change event for a slider. So we can create, we're going to create a method to handle change, and we can put it right before the return. So we'll call it handle change, and we're going to expect the event. So the event type for the slider is going to be a synthetic React change event. Okay. And then the value, the new value we're going to get is going to be the new values of ticks. So what we can do is we can just pass it from the handler, because that's the second property it expects. So we can actually set the new value, pass it right from the properties of our function, and it's gonna, you could check it in the docs, but it expects either a number or a number array string. I'm sorry, a number array. So it's going to either return a number or a number array. In our case, it really is going to return a number, not an array. And then what we can do is we can take that new value and make sure it's cast as number, so it's not going to complain. And then we can just set the number of ticks to the new value. Okay. And wait a second, make sure the error is gone. Okay. And now if you remember, in our use effect hook right here in the callback, we're using the number of ticks. So it's going to get, it's binding to it and it's going to get called. So we need to make sure that that's a handle, otherwise it's not going to recognize the ticks. If we refresh our local host, looks like it's giving me an error. Let's take a look. It's giving me an error because of TypeScript, and this is really why TypeScript is great, but it's also giving us some extra work. We rather everything get verified while we're developing instead of it's breaking live. You can see it's expecting an event, change event of a type object, and we're passing just a synthetic change event. So if I change it to what it expects, which is a change event with a type object, so we can do the synthetic, just we need to pass the type as the object, and that should do it. Let's see, refresh again. There you go. So you can see here we got the days, we got the price, and we got the slider working. So everything and we got the price here. Now, if we look at the chart, what is the chart telling us? In 2020, you could see most of the days, this is on the top upper chart, the price of Ethereum was around 400 and around 200 to 250. So 24 days of the year, it was hovering around those price ranges. So it can give us an idea, and we can look at the chart and quickly read it and get the story of what's going on here.